Section 1. The forest exhales softly beneath a pale wash of twilight. Pines lean together above the quiet clearing, their needles sighing with the hush of an evening breeze. Somewhere beyond, the slow, rhythmic pull of the Atlantic breathes against the shore, each wave folding back into itself like a whisper returning home. And there, beneath the shadow of one weathered tree, a single word lingers, carved deep into its grain. Rough yet deliberate. Croatoan. No more, no less. No cries for help, no letters, no sign of struggle, just a lonely mark scratched into wood where voices once filled the air. The homes are gone, the fires are cold, the settlement is empty. More than 100 souls vanished here, men, women, children, entire families, leaving behind this one cryptic message and a silence that has endured for centuries. It isn't a silence of peace, though. It's the kind of silence that seems purposeful, heavy, like something pressing against the air itself. And tonight, we're going to follow that silence. Gently, slowly, like footsteps through soft sand at dusk. You probably won't sleep soundly after this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and the time on your clock right now. I love knowing who's awake with me as we wander into old mysteries together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift into tonight's story together. It begins in the summer of 1587, when John White sets foot on this island with over 100 English settlers, dreaming of a new home across an untamed ocean. Among them is his daughter, Eleanor Dare, and her unborn child, Virginia, who will become the first English baby born on these shores. The land must have seemed endless then. The salt air, the green hush of forests, the promise of rivers and fields. England called it Virginia, in honor of Queen Elizabeth. A fresh beginning. But beneath that hopeful surface, shadows were already stirring. When White returns to England later that year to gather supplies, he expects to be back within months. Instead, war rises between England and Spain, swallowing his plans. 3 years pass before he returns. By then, the Roanoke settlement is gone. The palisade stands weathered but empty. The homes are dismantled, their timbers stripped and carried elsewhere. Personal belongings have vanished entirely, as though someone packed them carefully before leaving. It feels less like chaos and more like a plan. And yet, there are no tracks, no boats, no letters left behind, just that single carved word. Historians still wonder if it was a sign of safety, meant to tell White where they'd gone. Croatoan Island, home of the friendly Croatoan tribe. But if the settlers had moved there, why did White find no trace of them when he tried to search later? Why, after centuries of excavation, do we find fragments of pottery and English tools scattered like breadcrumbs, but never enough to tell the whole story? The word lingers like a breath caught mid-sentence. Stand here now, among the tall grasses where the palisade once rose, and you'll understand why the mystery endures. The wind curls through the marsh, rustling reeds and forgotten roots. The pines murmur overhead. It feels as though the land remembers everything, but won't tell. Some locals whisper that on quiet nights, if you stand near the old settlement and listen closely, you can hear faint voices carried on the salt air. Children laughing, footsteps brushing across leaves, a lullaby sung in a language long since lost. Of course, it could just be the wind. Or maybe not. The word carved into the tree is the beginning of Roanoke's silence. But not the end of its story. From here, we drift backward, across oceans and ambition, to England's dream of a new world. A dream so fragile it will carry families across thousands of miles and into the heart of one of history's quietest tragedies. The dream begins softly, far from Roanoke's whispering pines. It begins in England, where the air carries the smell of coal smoke and damp stone. And where restless ambition hums beneath the surface of everyday life. By the 1580s, Queen Elizabeth I rules a kingdom eager to claim its place among the great powers of the world. Spain and Portugal are already rich from their empires, gold and silver flowing endlessly from the Americas into their coffers. England looks across the Atlantic and imagines its future written there, too. In 1584, Queen Elizabeth grants Sir Walter Raleigh a royal charter to explore, claim, and settle land in the so-called New World. It's a promise, softly spoken but heavy with expectation. establish an English foothold across the ocean and bring wealth and glory home. Historians still wonder if Raleigh sought empire, profit, or personal immortality. Perhaps it was all three. Raleigh names the vast, distant territory, Virginia, honoring his queen, the Virgin Queen. The word rolls gently on parchment, full of hope and possibility. But the ocean doesn't care for parchment dreams. The Atlantic crossing in the late 16th century is no soft passage. Ships creak and groan beneath constant winds. Salt spray stings the skin. Weeks blur into months beneath endless skies where stars seem close enough to touch. Yet food spoils faster than it can be rationed. Storms appear without warning, snapping masts and scattering fleets. And always, at the horizon, waits the unknown. For Raleigh's explorers, though, the risk feels worth the promise. Reports return of wide rivers, fertile land, forests so dense they seem to breathe, and shores lined with soft white sands. The dream sharpens. Build a settlement here. One that will rival Spain's colonies and secure England's future. At least, that's the story Raleigh sells to investors back home. The first expedition lands on Roanoke Island in 1585. 108 men step onto its sandy shores, believing they're planting the seeds of an empire. Among them are soldiers, artisans, explorers, and chroniclers like Thomas Harriot, whose soft, measured words describe a land both strange and full of promise. The island itself is quiet and green, wrapped in brackish waters and wild marshes. Nearby tribes, the Croatoan, the Socotan, and the Desamingpunka, watch the newcomers carefully. At first, there's trade, corn for beads, fish for tools, mutual curiosity, cautious but warm. The Croatoan especially, led by Chief Manteo, open their knowledge of tides, seasons, and hidden waterways to these pale strangers. For a moment, the dream seems within reach. But Roanoke doesn't bend easily to English plans. Supplies dwindle, crops fail in the sandy soil, mosquitoes hum in the heat, carrying sickness the settlers don't understand. Harriet records peculiar fevers sweeping through both the settlers and the local tribes. Neither equipped to fight diseases brought across the sea. And as resources thin, goodwill frays. In June of 1586, Governor Ralph Lane orders a preemptive strike against Chief Wingina of the Socotan. Fearing an uprising, Wingina is killed. The air between the settlers and most native groups chills immediately. This choice, rash, irreversible, plants the first shadow on Roanoke's story. The surviving colonists abandon the settlement a year later, hitching a desperate passage back to England aboard Sir Francis Drake's fleet. But Raleigh isn't ready to surrender his dream. In 1587, he tries again. This time, the colony is different. Instead of soldiers and explorers, families sail for the New World, 115 men, women, and children, including Eleanor Dare, heavily pregnant with her daughter Virginia. This isn't a temporary outpost anymore. It's meant to be home. The settlers intend to land near Chesapeake Bay, where the soil is richer and relations with local tribes rumored to be friendlier. But their pilot, Simon Fernandez, insists on stopping short. Against Raleigh's orders, he forces them to disembark on Roanoke Island, the very site of the failed first colony. Historians still wonder why. Some blame haste. Fernandez was eager to resume privateering in the Caribbean. Others suspect hidden motives, sabotage, secret instructions, or grudges long buried. Whatever the cause, the choice sets everything in motion. At first, hope endures. The settlers rebuild abandoned homes, repair palisades, and plant new crops. They celebrate the birth of Virginia Dare, the first English child born on this continent. It feels, briefly, like a blessing. But beneath the joy lies unease. Supplies run thin faster than expected. Relations with surrounding tribes remain fragile. Even with Manteo's continued support, famine whispers softly in the distance, its voice growing louder with each passing day. Governor John White sees the danger. He makes a painful choice. He must return to England for supplies, leaving behind his daughter, his newborn granddaughter, and more than 100 souls who trust him to come back. He promises it will only be a few months. None of them know it will be 3 years. And so the stage is set. The settlers wait. The land grows quiet. And far across the ocean, storms of war rise to swallow the plans of everyone involved. Roanoke becomes a fragile hope balanced on the edge of a knife, where one absence, one delay, will change everything. The first attempt at Roanoke lingers like a faint echo. Soft but insistent, because before the colony vanished, failure had already taken root. It is the spring of 1585 when Sir Walter Raleigh's first settlers step onto the shores of Roanoke Island. There are no women, no children this time, only 108 men chosen for their skill, strength, and willingness to endure the unknown. They arrive full of hope, believing they're planting the first seeds of England's empire. But the land has its own rhythm, and the newcomers struggle to hear it. The island itself is beautiful, almost deceptively so. Salt marshes glimmer beneath the sun. Pines stretch upward, whispering softly in the Atlantic breeze. Nights are warm, alive with cicadas and distant owls. But the beauty hides harsh realities. Supplies run low sooner than expected. The settlers cannot coax their crops to grow in Roanoke's sandy soil. Mosquitoes cloud the air near brackish streams, bringing fevers neither the English nor the local tribes understand. Food spoils quickly beneath the heat, and even the fish-filled waters sometimes turn strangely empty. At first, the colonists trade with nearby tribes, the Croatoan, the Socotan, and the Desamingpunka, exchanging iron tools and beads for maize, fish, and guidance. One figure, Chief Manteo of the Croatoan, becomes an invaluable ally, patient and curious about these pale strangers. But trust proves fragile. The colony's governor, Ralph Lane, is a soldier at heart. Where Manteo sees opportunity for peace, Lane sees threats hiding in shadows. He fears that Chief Wingina of the Socotan is uniting neighboring tribes against the settlers. Tensions rise quietly, soft glances exchanged between campfires. Rumors murmured beneath breath. In June of 1586, Lane acts first. Under his orders, English soldiers ambush and kill Wingina. It's a choice historians still debate. Some argue Lane responded to real danger. Others believe he misread diplomacy as hostility, letting paranoia lead him into violence. Either way, this act breaks the fragile balance. The Croatoan remain tentatively loyal, but the Socotan and Desamingpunka withdraw entirely. Where food once came through trade, now the settlers face isolation. Nights grow quieter in the forests. Paths once open for hunting are closed. Without allies, survival becomes tenuous. Thomas Harriot, the colony's chronicler, records something peculiar during this time. Great sickness spreads among the people here, both ours and theirs, strange swelling and fevers, without knowing why. Historians believe this refers to diseases carried unknowingly across the Atlantic. Infections devastating to native populations and dangerous to settlers unaccustomed to the land. A silent tragedy unfolds. Villages emptying without battles. Alliances dissolving beneath invisible plagues. As food dwindles, anxiety deepens. One settler, George Howe, wanders alone along the shoreline to gather crabs. Days later, his body is found in the sand. Arrow wounds dark against pale skin. The colony begins to whisper of omens. Just when desperation threatens to fracture the group entirely, salvation arrives like a sail on the horizon. In June 1586, Sir Francis Drake anchors his fleet off the coast. Fresh from raids in the Caribbean, he offers the settlers supplies, ships, even passage home. The decision is quiet, almost reluctant, but inevitable. Lane's men abandon Roanoke, climbing aboard Drake's fleet and sailing back to England. By the time they leave, the island is already starting to reclaim what little they built. Palisades lean in the salt-heavy air. Tools rust in damp soil. The paths between shelters blur beneath encroaching grass. And yet, strangely, they do not take everything. Some tools remain. A few personal belongings are left behind. As though the colony meant to return, or as though some never left at all. Weeks later, an English supply ship finally arrives at Roanoke. Finding the settlement deserted, the crew leaves crates of tools and provisions onshore and sails away. Those supplies vanish into silence. The first colony dissolves into failure. But its shadow stretches forward. When John White arrives in 1587 to lead a second attempt, he inherits a land already scarred by mistrust, sickness, and blood. Relations with nearby tribes are strained. Alliances uncertain. And whispers of the Socotan's vengeance still drift among the Croatoan. White walks through the remnants of Lane's Roanoke and sees what's left: abandoned paths, quiet waters, and a wilderness that doesn't easily forgive intrusions. One lesser-known detail from Harriet's writings lingers softly. At times, strange lights move upon the Sound at night, though no man nor torch we find. Were they fires from distant tribes? Ships at sea? Or something more inexplicable? Whatever their source, these flickering lights are remembered long after the colony itself disappears, becoming part of Roanoke's enduring unease. By the time white settlers unpack their trunks and rebuild their homes, the stage is already set. A land where trust is fragile, where food is scarce, where even the safest shores hum faintly with absence. This first failure isn't just a prelude, it's a warning. One White will never fully heed. The summer of 1587 drapes softly over Roanoke Island, heavy with salt air and the low hum of cicadas hiding in the pines. The second colony is just beginning, its hopes fragile but bright. John White, an artist and mapmaker turned reluctant governor, moves carefully among the settlers, sketching the shoreline, soothing tempers, and watching his daughter, Eleanor Dare, cradle her newborn child, Virginia Dare, the first English baby born in the New World. A soft promise, a symbol of beginnings. For a brief moment, it feels like the dream might hold. But beneath the laughter of new life, quiet unease stirs. The colony's arrival has already been misaligned with its intentions. Originally, the settlers were bound for Chesapeake Bay, where fertile land and friendlier tribes promised better prospects. But their Portuguese pilot, Simon Fernandez, makes a choice that will echo for centuries. He forces them to land on Roanoke instead, the very site where Raleigh's first colony failed only 2 years earlier. Historians still wonder why. Some claim Fernandez feared the shoals near Chesapeake, anxious to avoid grounding his ships. Others suspect hidden motives, sabotage whispered by Spanish influence, personal grudges, or secret orders Raleigh never recorded. Whatever the reason, 115 settlers, men, women, and children, find themselves rebuilding among ghosts. At first, there's determination. They mend broken palisades, repurpose weathered timbers, and plant crops in sandy soil. They patch old shelters and clear new paths through tall grasses bending in the sea breeze. Manteo, the Croatoan chief who had traveled to England with earlier expeditions, greets them as an ally. His tribe offers guidance and food where they can. Though the settlers sense an edge of caution, the scars left by Ralph Lane's earlier violence still run deep. And while the Croatoan remain cordial, other tribes, the Socotan and Desamingpunka, keep their distance. Trade routes are quiet, smiles are guarded, and whispers of Winina's death still ripple softly through the forests. In August, Eleanor gives birth beneath the shade of pine rafters. Imagine it, the hush of the settlement broken by a single newborn cry. Tiny lungs filling with salt-heavy air. The colonists gather, weary but hopeful, to witness history's quiet milestone, Virginia Dare, the first English child born on this continent. It feels like an omen of good fortune. Or perhaps, though no one says it aloud, a reminder of how much is now at stake. By late summer, cracks begin to widen, food dwindles faster than expected, and what little is planted struggles to grow. Fishing yields less than promised. Relations with nearby tribes remain delicate, strained by mistrust and the quiet memory of Lane's attacks. Governor White sees it clearly: without more supplies, they won't survive their first winter. It's a choice no parent should face. But White makes it anyway. Before departing, the settlers agree on a plan. If they must leave Roanoke while he is gone, they'll carve a message indicating their destination. If danger forces them to flee, they'll mark a Maltese cross above the message as a signal of distress. A simple promise, meant to tether them together across an ocean. White boards his ship in August 1587, expecting to return within months. On the shore, Eleanor watches silently, Virginia cradled in her arms. Manteo stands nearby, the wind tugging gently at his cloak. White lifts a hand but doesn't wave. Perhaps he can't. Perhaps he knows that farewells spoken aloud have a weight all their own. But storms rise faster than plans can hold. When White reaches England, he finds his country consumed by the looming threat of the Spanish Armada. Ships are seized for war, harbors locked down, and supplies redirected. White pleads with Raleigh, begs Elizabeth's counsel. offers his own fortune to secure a rescue expedition. Time stretches. Weeks turn to months, months to years. By the time White finally secures passage back to Roanoke, 3 summers have passed. Imagine him stepping onto the familiar shore in 1590, the same sand, the same wind, the same whispering pines. He expects laughter, the smoke of cooking fires, the sound of Virginia's toddler footsteps beneath Eleanor's soft voice. Instead, he finds silence. The palisade remains, weathered but standing. The houses are dismantled, their timbers stripped and carried elsewhere. Personal belongings are gone, not abandoned, but taken carefully, as though the settlers planned to return someday. No graves, no signs of violence. And then, beneath the shadow of a weathered tree, a single carved word waits for him. Croatoan. White breathes it aloud, almost a whisper. Relief floods him briefly. Perhaps they've gone to Croatoan Island, where Mantio's people would keep them safe. But storms drive his ship away before he can search. White sails back to England once more, never to return. Among his papers, preserved long after his death, lies a map of Roanoke and its surrounding coastlines. In one corner, beneath layers of faded ink, researchers in the 21st century uncover something strange. A faint symbol drawn beneath White's own sketches, a star marking an inland location, concealed deliberately beneath a patch of paper. Historians still wonder if White knew more than he ever said. It's a soft tragedy, made sharper by its restraint. A father who never sees his daughter again. A grandfather who never knows his granddaughter's fate. A governor who carries silence back across an ocean. The colony waits where he left it, empty, dismantled, erased except for one carved word. Croatoan. A promise, a destination, or perhaps, a warning. The year is 1588. And far across the Atlantic, England holds its breath. The horizon fills with sails, Spain's Armada. More than 130 warships, rolling toward the English Channel like a wall of iron and wood. Cannon fire lights the fog over cold waters. And every whisper of strategy drifts through candlelit rooms in London. For John White, though, the roar of distant battles drowns out the softest voices of all. Those of his daughter Eleanor, his infant granddaughter Virginia, and the 115 settlers waiting quietly on Roanoke Island. He promised he would return within months. Instead, he is trapped in a country consumed by war. When White arrives in England in 1587, his first thought is resupply, fresh food, tools, weapons, and enough provisions to carry the fragile colony through its first winter. But almost immediately, his plans dissolve. Queen Elizabeth seizes every available ship to defend England from Spain. Merchant fleets are conscripted. Privateer captains are ordered home. Ports are locked down. Even vessels already bound for the New World are recalled. Their crews reassigned to fight for survival. White begs Raleigh. He pleads with Elizabeth's advisors. He offers his personal fortune to fund a single rescue voyage. But to the crown, Roanoke is distant, abstract, a small settlement balanced against the weight of an empire's fate. The colony can wait. The settlers cannot. 3 summers pass. While England survives and celebrates the Armada's defeat, Roanoke drifts silently beyond reach. Imagine the days blurring one into the next on the island, fishing lines drying in the sun, smoke curling from dwindling fires, voices growing quieter as hunger spreads. Imagine watching tides come and go, hoping for sails on the horizon that never appear. At first, perhaps, they believed he was coming back. By the second winter, perhaps they weren't so sure. By the third, they must have known. Historians still wonder what choices those years forced upon them. White finally secures passage in 1590 aboard a private expedition, the Hopewell. Even then, fate resists him. A storm gathers over the Atlantic, scattering his small fleet. Pirates harass their progress, forcing detours and delays. Rations spoil, tempers fray, and by the time White reaches the Carolina coast, summer wanes again. Still, hope clings to him like salt on his skin. He imagines smoke rising above the treeline, Virginia's laughter carried on warm breezes, Eleanor waiting at the edge of the settlement. But when the Hopewell anchors off Roanoke's shore, only silence greets him. The palisades are weathered but intact. The paths between houses are blurred beneath overgrowth. Timber from the homes has been stripped and carried elsewhere, carefully. Not in haste. No shattered doors, No scattered belongings. It feels deliberate, as though the colony chose to move on. And then White sees it. A single carved word waits beneath a pale weathered post. Croatoan. Nearby, on a tree trunk, 3 faint letters. Crow. White exhales, almost relieved. Before leaving, he and the settlers had agreed on a simple plan. Carve their destination if they abandoned Roanoke, and mark a Maltese cross above the message if danger forced them away. There is no cross. By that code, the settlers should be safe. White's plan is simple. Sail south to Croatoan Island, where the Croatoan people, loyal allies under Chief Manteo, would have welcomed the settlers. But even this last fragile thread frays immediately. That night, a violent storm swells off the coast, dragging anchors loose and pushing the Hopewell out to open sea. The crew, exhausted and nearly out of supplies, refuses to risk returning. White protests, pleads, but he cannot command them. The Hopewell sails for England. John White never sets foot on Roanoke again. He spends his remaining years trying, unsuccessfully, to mount another rescue mission. In letters written before his death, his hope softens into resignation. I am left to wonder if they live yet, or if they rest. Among his sketches and maps, preserved centuries later, researchers find faint traces of hidden detail. Beneath one section of his Roanoke map, a layer of paper had been glued carefully, concealing a symbol drawn below, a small fort-shaped mark, miles inland from the abandoned colony. Historians still debate its meaning. Was it White's guess at where the settlers had gone? Or did he know something, and hide it on purpose? Meanwhile, England moves on. Walter Raleigh faces political ruin. Imprisoned in the Tower of London. New colonies are planned elsewhere. Jamestown rises in 1607, less than 150 miles away. But Roanoke is left untouched. As if deliberately forgotten, the 3 lost years between White's departure and return remain the quiet fulcrum of the entire mystery. Did the settlers starve, assimilate, flee inland? Were they taken by force, or by choice? Perhaps the truth lies in fragments scattered between Croatoan shores, river valleys, and legends whispered in native songs. Or perhaps those 3 years hold something darker still. Because sometimes, time doesn't just erase people. Sometimes, it protects secrets. The shoreline greets John White with silence. His boots press softly into damp sand, each step sinking a little deeper as the tide breathes against the shore. Above him, gulls wheel lazily in the late summer sky, their cries sharp and hollow against the quiet. He pauses for a long moment, listening, hoping for voices, laughter, children's shouts, a call of his name. But there is nothing. The settlement stands waiting, weathered and still. The palisade remains upright, its timbers gray with sun and salt. But inside, the village feels strangely deliberate in its emptiness. The houses are gone, not collapsed, not burned, but taken down carefully, as though dismantled for use elsewhere. The ground is swept clean. There are no broken tools scattered, no clothes left behind. Every belonging is missing, carried away with intent. It feels less like abandonment and more like migration. Yet there are no tracks leading inland, no boats drawn up along the shore. The silence presses closer. Then White sees it, the single message, carved into a sturdy post of the palisade. Deep and plain, Croatoan. Nearby, on a tree trunk, another faint carving, Crow. He bends closer, brushing his hand across the grooves. Before leaving 3 years earlier, they had made a simple agreement. If the settlers departed, they would carve their destination. If danger forced them, they would mark a Maltese cross above the word. There is no cross, no sign of distress. By that code, White should feel relief. It means they left safely, perhaps to join the Croatoan on Hatteras Island. But relief does not come. The village itself whispers unease. Near the palisade, White finds one of his own trunks, broken open, its papers ruined by weather and sand. Oddly, little else is left behind, only this chest. Its contents rotted and spoiled, as though someone had chosen it deliberately to be destroyed. Inside the settlement, the fire pits are cold, their ash long washed away. Gardens lie overgrown. The paths between homes are blurred by 3 years of neglect. And yet, White notices something strange. The palisade had been reinforced. If they intended to leave, why strengthen their defenses first? Historians still wonder if the settlers had fought one last, unseen struggle. defending themselves long enough to plan an orderly departure. That night, White and his men camp near the empty site. As darkness folds over the island, one sailor swears he sees a flicker of light deep among the trees. Others hear faint rustling, as though footsteps move just beyond reach. When they search, there is nothing, no fire, no voices, only the stillness of pine and marsh. Watching. Centuries later, locals around Roanoke will still speak of lantern lights moving across the sound at night, pale glimmers that vanish if followed, reappearing farther off, like distant signals that never resolve into meaning. Morning comes. White pleads with his captain to sail south to Croatoan Island, to search for Eleanor, Virginia, and the rest. The crew agrees, until another storm rises from the horizon. The wind surges, anchors strain, sails whip and crack, the ships are driven into open sea. Supplies are already low, and the men, weary from months of hardship, refuse to risk another landing. White protests, but the decision is final. The Hopewell turns for England. The colony is left behind once more, silent beneath the whispering pines. White dies a few years later, never knowing if his family survived. Among his surviving maps, centuries later, scholars discover a hidden mark beneath a patch of paper, a faint symbol of a fort. Drawn inland from Roanoke, was it a clue, a theory, or a secret he never shared aloud? Historians still debate it softly, as though the map itself is whispering an answer they can't quite hear. Today, when archaeologists walk the ruins of Roanoke, the silence lingers still. Fragments of pottery surface in the soil. A rusted nail catches the light. Small shards of English life, scattered like breadcrumbs across the centuries. And always, the word carved into wood echoes back. Croatoan, a destination, a promise, or perhaps, a warning scratched for us. Not for John White. If you stand quietly on the island today, the marsh grass sways around your ankles, and the wind curls through the trees like a sigh. The ground feels hollow, as if something waits just beneath it, in absence pressing upward, reminding you that over 100 voices once filled this place. Now, only the silence speaks. Theories drift softly around Roanoke's silence, like ripples spreading over still water. From the moment John White sails back to England with no answers, speculation begins, and 4 centuries later, we are still leaning into whispers, piecing together fragments too delicate to hold. What happened to the 115 men, women, and children who vanished from the Roanoke settlement? Did they survive? Did they perish quietly? Or did they choose to become something unrecognizable, leaving behind only a carved word for us to wonder at? The answers dissolve the closer we reach for them. Theory 1. A gentle assimilation. The most widely accepted explanation is also, perhaps, the calmest. The settlers joined the Croatoan people on nearby Hatteras Island. The clues seem to point there. The carvings, Croatoan, and Crow, suggest intent, not panic. Chief Manteo, long a friend to the English, offered safe harbor and food in times of need. Later English accounts describe native tribes speaking English words, using European tools, and even wearing pendants fashioned from silver recovered from Roanoke. Jamestown settlers in the early 1600s recorded meeting native children with lighter hair and gray eyes. But even so, no direct trace of the colonists has ever been confirmed. Archaeologists uncover shards of English pottery on Hatteras Island, iron tools repurposed into arrowheads, and beads matching those carried by Roanoke settlers. Yet these pieces might have arrived through trade, not through assimilation. Historians still wonder if this theory is too simple, too neat for a disappearance that feels anything but. Theory 2. Hostile retaliation. Another possibility suggests a quieter tragedy, that the settlers were attacked by neighboring tribes angered by earlier English violence. The first Roanoke attempt in 1585 had left deep scars. Governor Ralph Lane's decision to kill Chief Wingina fractured alliances and seeded distrust that John White's settlers inherited 2 years later. Tensions may have grown unbearable as drought tightened its grip on the land. Some scholars argue that an attack wiped out part or all of the colony. But here, too, the evidence falters. There are no mass graves, no burnt palisades, no scattered belongings left behind in haste. If violence did come, it was either swift and silent, or happened far from the settlement itself. Theory 3. Starvation and flight. The Earth itself whispers another possibility. Tree ring studies reveal Roanoke settlers arrived during one of the worst droughts in 800 years. Rivers shrank, crops withered, fish vanished from shallows where they once teemed. Imagine watching the last casks of flour empty, the maize stores dwindling, and the surrounding tribes struggling to feed their own families. Trade collapses. Hunger presses against every decision. Some settlers may have left quietly in small groups, seeking food inland or along river systems, hoping to find safer ground. Scattered English artifacts, found far from Roanoke, suggest fragments of the colony may have drifted deep into unfamiliar territories, but no single site bears enough to prove survival. Theory 4. Spanish Shadows. At the time, Spain and England are locked in bitter rivalry for control of the Americas. Spanish forces stationed in Florida knew of the English presence at Roanoke. Some suspect a secret Spanish raid wiped out the colony. Documents from the period confirm Spain launched missions north to seek and destroy English intrusions. Yet no record claims the act. Historians debate whether the silence is evidence of failure or deliberate erasure. Was Roanoke destroyed without trace? Its story buried beneath shifting loyalties and unfinished maps? Or is Spain's absence in the records simply another coincidence? Theory 5. A vanishing by design. And then, softly, we arrive at the strangest theory of all. Some archaeologists point to the deliberate dismantling of the Roanoke homes, the careful removal of belongings, the absence of panic carved into the settlement itself. It feels less like disappearance and more like transformation. What if the settlers chose to dissolve their English identity? What if they left not to escape danger but to escape being found? Fragments of Croatoan oral histories describe pale ones who came hungry, and names we do not speak. Other stories whisper of settlers who walked between peoples but carried new names, new faces, leaving their past behind as though it had never existed. The weight of contradictions. Each theory explains something, none explains everything. If they assimilated, where are the clear records? If they fled inland, why no confirmed settlements? If violence claimed them, why is the site so orderly? If they hid, why leave a word carved into wood at all? Theories branch endlessly, but always circle back to the same absence, a silence deeper than history usually allows. Sometimes, standing beneath the pines of Roanoke, the earth feels heavy with memory. It's easy to imagine the settlers still here somehow, beneath the shifting sands and soft loam. Not gone but folded into the land itself. On misted nights, locals speak of voices drifting through the marshes, low, melodic, almost like chanting. Others claim to see faint lantern lights bobbing through distant trees, always receding when approached. Of course, it could just be the wind, the fog, the power of suggestion. Or maybe, somewhere in that long silence, Roanoke became something we no longer recognize. Theories drift softly, and still the mystery endures. A carved word, a dismantled village, and an emptiness that feels less like loss and more like choice. The carved word points softly, like a lantern in fog. Croatoan. For more than 4 centuries, it has pulled us southward toward Hatteras Island, once home to the Croatoan people, where gentle shores meet restless tides. If the settlers truly left Roanoke, this is where they should have gone. And in quiet fragments scattered through sand and story, it seems they did. Mantio's promise. Among the local tribes, Chief Mantio stood apart. He had sailed to England years earlier with Raleigh's first reconnaissance expeditions, learned the English tongue, and returned as an intermediary between two worlds. When John White's colony arrived in 1587, Mantio's Croatoan people offered them food, guidance, and fragile friendship. White even bestowed on Mantio the title, Lord of Roanoke and Desamingpunka, marking him as both ally and protector in English eyes. If Roanoke failed, Croatoan Island seemed a natural refuge. Historians still wonder whether the settlers actually reached it, or if the word carved into wood was a promise left unfulfilled. Fragments in the sand. Archaeological digs on Hatteras Island revealed delicate pieces of a vanished world. Shards of Elizabethan pottery, identical to those used by Roanoke settlers. Iron tools reshaped into native arrowheads. The metal carefully hammered and repurposed. Beads and pendants matching English trade goods from the late 16th century. For decades, These finds were hailed as proof the settlers survived here, folding into the Croatoan community. But some artifacts tell a different story. In 1998, researchers unearthed a gold signet ring believed to belong to an English nobleman, possibly one of the colonists. Excitement swelled, yet later testing revealed the ring was 17th-century brass, not 16th-century gold, suggesting it likely arrived through trade. Decades after Roanoke's disappearance, again, the evidence flickers, then fades. Whispers in oral history. Among Croatoan descendants, soft stories pass from one generation to the next. Some speak of pale-skinned families who came from the island of the hungry, carrying tools, strange songs, and names no one remembers. One 19th-century anthropologist recorded an elder's account. They came to us thin as shadows. We fed them, they lived, but their names, we do not speak. Historians debate whether this silence reflects assimilation, trauma, or something more deliberate, a forgetting chosen or imposed. The Jamestown connection. 2 decades later, in 1607, English settlers at Jamestown hear persistent rumors. Members of the Roanoke colony are alive, living among nearby tribes. Captain John Smith writes of native guides describing English clothed in skins and carrying iron tools far inland. Other reports speak of children with lighter eyes, hair touched with copper gold, singing songs in broken English. Yet when Smith attempts to investigate, he's warned away. Follow not the pale shadows. They are not as they were. The phrase lingers like a sigh. Not as they were. The vanishing names. If Roanoke settlers found safety with the Croatoan, why do their names vanish so completely? There are no recorded English surnames among Croatoan oral histories. No surviving English prayers. No family lines traced back unbroken. It's as though the settlers, if they lived, chose to dissolve their identities, or had them dissolved for them. This possibility unsettles historians. Survival at the cost of memory. Rescue bound to erasure. A hybrid people. Archaeological evidence along the Carolina coast suggests more than coexistence. It hints at transformation. English pottery shards found in native settlements show patterns of dual use, tools once English reshaped into something new. Merging technologies and traditions. Early Jamestown accounts describe tribal leaders wearing pendants made from English silver, while children weave English melodies into Croatoan chants. It feels less like the colonists joined another people and more like they became a third. Unnamed culture, a bridge erased by time. The Croatoan silence. Yet one detail remains persistent and quiet. The Croatoan themselves never claimed the colonists. Not openly. Not even generations later. Perhaps this was out of protection. Perhaps shame. Or perhaps something happened on Croatoan Island that no one wished remembered. Some oral histories speak, faintly, of a sickness carried by the pale ones. A shadow that followed them wherever they went. Whether real or imagined, it may explain why so little was said, and why those who came from Roanoke were folded into the tribe without keeping their names. If you walk the dunes of Hatteras Island today, the wind brushes against you in long, slow breaths. Fragments of pottery still wash up after storms, pale and salt-worn, like voices rising briefly from sand before vanishing again beneath the tide. And if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. A soft merging of languages. A lullaby sung in 2 voices. A life lived, but unremembered. Perhaps the settlers didn't die on Roanoke at all. Perhaps they lived, but in living, they became invisible. A colony not lost, but dissolved. The earth holds memories softly, beneath layers of sand and silence. For centuries, the dunes around Roanoke Island and the barrier shores of the Outer Banks have shifted restlessly, swallowing traces of the past and revealing them again in whispers, bone by bone, fragment by fragment. If Roanoke settlers truly vanished, the land itself seems reluctant to agree. Bones found by accident. The first fragments surfaced in 1934. After a summer storm tore open dunes along the coast. A fisherman spotted something pale where the tide had pulled away the sand, a slender jawbone. Its edges weathered smooth. Nearby lay a scatter of rib fragments, half hidden beneath wet grasses. At first, locals assumed they belonged to victims of shipwrecks, washed ashore over centuries of violent storms. But archaeologists called to the site noted something peculiar. The bones lay miles inland, far from where wreckage typically settles. The burial was shallow, almost careless, no markers, no ceremony. And it was only the beginning. The scattered graves. Over decades, scattered remains emerged from wetlands, forests, and dunes across the Outer Banks region. A partial skeleton, buried beneath oyster shells, the teeth ground down as though by a European diet. A child's femur, found inland near the Chowan River, wrapped in woven grasses unusual for native burials. Fragments of skulls showing healed fractures treated with techniques matching Elizabethan medical practices. Yet none of these discoveries came with certainty. There are no names, no inscriptions, no single mass grave tying the settlers together. Instead, the bones seem to drift, spread thinly across the coast as though scattered deliberately, or slowly claimed by centuries of storms and tides. Historians still wonder if these remains belong to Roanoke settlers, to native peoples, or to some mingled community between them. The lost camp discovery. In 1998, researchers excavating a site near the Albemarle Sound uncovered something haunting. Shards of English pottery, burned along one edge, a rusted rapier hilt, its design matching those carried by Raleigh's expeditions. Two carefully aligned graves, dug shallow into sandy soil. The bodies inside were adult males, their arms folded across their chests as though placed there intentionally. Carbon dating fixed their deaths to the late 1580s. During the exact years the colony vanished. But neither skull remained. The missing skulls deepened the mystery. Were they removed deliberately, for ritual, for warning, or for remembrance? Or did storms erode them away across centuries, lost to shifting earth and water? Some anthropologists connect this to spiritual traditions among coastal tribes, where skulls were sometimes separated in rites meant to bind spirits to a place. Others dismiss that theory entirely, calling it colonial projection onto native customs. Either way, these two quiet graves are the closest we've come to placing Roanoke's settlers on a map after White's disappearance. And even here, the silence holds more questions than answers. Storms as thieves. The Outer Banks are restless, constantly reshaped by hurricanes and tides. Entire forests vanish beneath shifting sands. Whole settlements have been swallowed by water within a generation. If Roanoke settlers died near the coast, their graves may have been claimed by the sea long ago. Every storm remakes the shoreline, and with each reshaping, a little more history is carried out to deeper waters. Some believe the bones scattered across the region were never placed there deliberately at all, just fragments of lives once buried intact, lifted and moved slowly by waves. Season after season, ghost camps in the trees. In 2015, ground-penetrating radar detected faint rectangular impressions inland from Roanoke, near where two rivers converge. Archaeologists unearthed post holes suggesting hastily built shelters, ash layers from small fire pits, extinguished abruptly, tiny fragments of Elizabethan pipe stems mixed with native pottery. It hints at a temporary encampment, perhaps one of many. Maybe a splinter group from Roanoke tried to survive here before moving on. Or perhaps this was where some lives ended quietly, their traces left to fade beneath growing forest. The camp offers no certainty, only another soft suggestion. Roanoke may not have vanished as one body but as many, dissolving in stages, scattered across both land and time. Stories that linger among descendants of nearby tribes. There are whispers older than paper. Some speak of pale ones who lived for a time among them, carrying strange tools and songs, before leaving again, or dying in winters their bodies could not withstand. One haunting phrase appears in several unrelated oral traditions. The names were taken, forgotten, buried deliberately, perhaps to protect the living from the weight of a tragedy too heavy to carry. If you stand now along the windswept dunes of the Outer Banks, you might feel the shifting sand beneath your feet, unsteady and soft. Somewhere below you, fragments may rest even now, bones wrapped in woven grass, beads traded between two worlds, rusted metal once carried across an ocean. And yet, every storm uncovers less than it hides. Perhaps that's why Roanoke endures, because its story is scattered like its people. Never whole, always just beyond reach. Not one ending, not one fate, but many threads, dissolving softly into the land and sea. The bones whisper, but they never answer. The whispers begin with a single stone. It's 1937, and the summer air along the Chowan River is heavy with heat. The kind that makes cicadas drone endlessly in the trees. A tourist named Lewis Hammond wanders the banks when he notices something pale beneath the tangled roots of a fallen oak. An oval-shaped stone, weathered smooth by time, half buried in mud. Carved into its surface are 47 uneven words, etched deep. Deliberate, and strangely soft in their message. Ananias Dare and Virginia went hence unto heaven 1591. And beneath that, another line, fainter, like a sigh across centuries. E.W. Dare. To whoever finds this stone, tell my father of my sorrow. The initials match Eleanor White Dare, John White's daughter, and mother of Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. If this is real, it isn't just stone, it's a voice, carried forward through silence. A frenzy of discovery. News spreads quickly. Within months, more Dare stones begin to surface across the Carolinas and Georgia. Each claimed by those who find them to carry pieces of the settlers' final story. Together, they seem to paint a gentle, tragic picture. The colony splits after White's departure. Many perish from sickness and hunger. The survivors flee inland, seeking safety among friendly tribes. Eleanor remarries a native chief. And her daughter Virginia grows into legend before dying young. One stone even carries Eleanor's final plea. Father, tell England we are no more. By 1939, the stones are displayed at Roanoke College in Georgia, celebrated as one of the century's greatest historical discoveries. For a brief, shining moment, it feels as though Roanoke's silence has finally spoken. The shadow of doubt. Then comes skepticism, soft at first, then swelling louder. Linguists studying the inscriptions notice subtle irregularities in spelling and grammar, inconsistent with Elizabethan English. Geologists question the weathering patterns. And troublingly, many of the later stones are found under suspiciously convenient circumstances, as if seekers knew exactly where to dig. By the early 1940s, most historians dismiss the collection as a hoax, a clever exploitation of America's fascination with Roanoke's mystery. And yet, the first stone stands alone, even after decades of scrutiny. The original Chowan River stone resists easy dismissal. Geological testing shows its carvings bear the microscopic wear expected of centuries-old incisions, weathering consistent with 16th-century techniques. Not modern tools. Its tone is quiet, restrained, almost painfully personal. Unlike the later stones, it lacks drama. It doesn't attempt to explain everything. It simply speaks of loss. The death of Eleanor's husband, her daughter's passing, her grief. Historians still wonder if this single stone might be genuine, a message carved softly into permanence. Never meant to be found. A hidden reverse. In 2019, researchers revisiting the original stone make a quiet discovery. On its reverse side, nearly erased by centuries of abrasion, are faint markings revealed through 3D imaging. They read, "The river carries them. Sleep." The words feel less like explanation and more like elegy, as though whoever carved them knew the Chowan would one day hold what Roanoke lost. Were they referencing settlers buried along its banks? Or something carried further downstream, into marshes no one has searched deeply enough? The weight of a whisper. If the first stone is authentic, it changes everything we think we know. At least some settlers survived until 1591, 4 years after White's departure. Eleanor Dare was alive to carve, or dictate, this message. The Chowan River, not Croatoan Island, may hold Roanoke's quietest truths. And yet, if the later stones are forgeries, why does this first one feel so different, so soft, so uncalculated? Historians still debate whether Eleanor's voice is truly reaching us, or whether the stone carries someone else's invention entirely. A thread unraveling. Even if Eleanor's plea is real, it leaves us with deeper questions. Why are there no matching graves where the first stone was found? Why leave a message at all, unless Eleanor knew no one would survive to tell her father otherwise? And why would a woman, grieving and displaced, choose stone as her memory, knowing it would outlast her words, her name, even her people? Perhaps she hoped the stone would be her final tether, an anchor to prevent Roanoke from vanishing completely. Or perhaps it was never meant to be found, just an act of quiet remembrance, folded into earth and time. If you walk the Chowan River today, The air smells of damp moss and cypress. The water drifts slowly beneath low-hanging branches, dark and reflective, hiding whatever secrets it keeps in its silty depths. Some nights, after heavy rain, locals say pale fragments still wash up, bits of bone, shards of pottery, a single Tudor bead polished smooth by centuries of current. Each fragment feels like an answer. And yet, together, they only deepen the silence. Maybe Eleanor's voice really does reach us, faint as wind through reeds. Or maybe the Dare stone is a mirror, reflecting our need to believe there was someone left to remember them at all. A message carved in grief. Or a message carved in longing. Either way, the stone whispers, and the silence around it whispers louder. The story the land tells is written in rings of ancient trees. In 1998, scientists from the University of Arkansas dug slender cores from bald cypress trees near Roanoke Island, quiet witnesses that have stood for centuries. Beneath layers of soft bark, the rings whispered a timeline of rain and drought, season after season, and in those rains, they found something chilling. Between 1587 and 1589, the very years John White's settlers waited on Roanoke, the region endured one of the worst droughts in over 800 years. The rivers shrank, crops failed, the soil cracked softly beneath relentless heat. The land itself may have turned against them. The sky that wouldn't weep. When the settlers arrived, they believed Roanoke's lush forests and wide rivers promised plenty. They brought seeds from England, tools for planting, plans for orchards and gardens. But the sandy soil beneath their feet couldn't hold water. As the drought deepened, even fishing grew unreliable. Rivers ran brackish. Game retreated into shadowed forests, where only those who truly knew the land could follow. Hunger, at first quiet, grew louder with each passing season. The fraying of fragile alliances. Drought touches everyone equally, and where there is scarcity, trust wears thin. The surrounding tribes, Croatoan, Sokotan, Desamingpunka, once traded food and knowledge freely. But as maize withered and streams dried, priorities shifted. Some oral histories from the region speak of tense negotiations during these years, where even longtime allies weighed each grain of corn against the survival of their own children. The settlers, new to this place and slow to adapt, must have felt the weight of dwindling options. Historians still wonder if this was the turning point, the moment desperation pushed Roanoke to fracture, scattering its families into paths we can only guess at. Small groups, quiet departures. Archaeological fragments hint at a slow unraveling rather than one sudden end. Elizabethan pottery shards have been found along the Chowan River, far inland from Roanoke. Native tools, made from repurposed English nails, appear hundreds of miles from the original settlement. Tiny beads, identical to those carried by Roanoke settlers, surface in river valleys where no records mention their arrival. It feels as though the colony splintered, families leaving in small groups, following waterways, seeking shelter among friendlier tribes or richer lands. Some may have survived this way, quietly absorbed into new communities. Others, perhaps not. Tension turned deadly. Starvation breeds suspicion. Among the tribes, memory of Ralph Lane's earlier violence still lingered like smoke. John White's colony inherited these scars. And as food dwindled, mistrust deepened. Some Sokotan oral traditions speak of pale ones raiding storehouses and fields. One fragment describes a quiet vengeance. They died by the river, and the river took their names. Whether this refers to Roanoke settlers or someone else entirely, we can't know, but it suggests that survival may not have been decided by weather alone. The signs beneath the soil. In 2015, archaeologists from the First Colony Foundation discovered something strange at a site called Site X where the Albemarle Sound meets the Chowan River. Shards of Roanoke-style pottery. Burned timbers shaped by English carpentry techniques. A single iron hook fused to charred bone fragments. Carbon dating places these objects in the late 1580s, exactly when the drought peaked. Was this a temporary camp? A refuge abandoned when supplies ran out? Or something darker? A place where the final choices were made? The drought as catalyst. It's possible Roanoke didn't vanish in a single moment at all. Perhaps drought fractured the colony one quiet decision at a time. First, some may have followed Manteo to Croatoan Island, hoping the sea would offer food the earth no longer could. Others might have struck inland, drawn by rivers that promised fresh water and fertile land. A few, weakened by hunger or illness, may have stayed behind, hoping for white's return until they could hope no longer. Different paths, different endings, the unsettling carving. And yet, one detail remains like a stone in the quiet. If the settlers splintered, why leave one unified message, Croatoan, before vanishing? Was it a signal? A promise? A lure? Or was it carved by someone after the fact, knowing what we'd find and steering us toward a path that leads only to questions? Historians still wonder whether the word was meant to guide us, or to mislead us. The land's silence. Walk Roanoke's marshy edges today, and you'll feel it, the hush of reeds leaning in soft wind. The salt, thick air heavy with memory. The trees here are older than the colony, and their rings carry secrets no one thought to ask. The drought may have broken the settlers slowly, but what followed remains hidden beneath centuries of silt and sand. Perhaps their fate lies beneath shifting riverbanks, where storms bury answers deeper with every season. Or perhaps the land is keeping its silence on purpose. Roanoke may not have been erased in one ending. It may have dissolved, thread by thread, beneath a sky that refused them rain. A colony lost not in a single act, but in a slow, soft unraveling. Names are fragile things. Sometimes they survive longer than empires. And sometimes, they vanish, as though erased on purpose. If the settlers of Roanoke truly survived, whether by joining the Croatoan or splintering into inland tribes, why do their names disappear completely? No White, no Dare, no Howe, no Eleanor, no Virginia. It is as though they were swallowed, not by death alone, but by forgetting. The missing words. Among the descendants of the Croatoan and neighboring peoples, oral histories speak softly of pale ones who came from the island of hunger. But what stands out most is what's not said, their names. One recorded fragment from the late 19th century repeats the same phrase 3 times. As though for emphasis. We fed them, they lived, but their names we do not speak. Why? Some historians believe this reflects assimilation by choice, families shedding their English identities to survive, folding entirely into new ways of life. Others suspect something less gentle. Perhaps the settlers were absorbed under conditions of grief or shame, and their memory deliberately softened until only silence remained. And yet, there is another possibility, that the forgetting was self-imposed. Erasures in Eleanor's shadow. Consider Eleanor Dare. If the first Dare stone is genuine, it suggests she survived at least 4 years after John White's departure. But beyond that stone, Eleanor vanishes entirely. No other source names her. No genealogy carries her forward. No descendants claim her as kin. It's as though she dissolved, like her colony, into mist. Some scholars propose this was deliberate, a breaking from the English past, a choice to become someone else. Others whisper of something heavier, a collective pact to abandon names, identities, and ties that might draw unwanted attention. The language that faded. Even language betrays no clear trace. Jamestown settlers in the early 1600s reported hearing English words sprinkled through native speech. Fragments passed like seeds from mouth to mouth, but no fluent English speakers were ever found. No songs survived in the settlers' tongue, and no written documents beyond the carvings remain. Some anthropologists suggest this fading was natural, by the second generation. The children of Roanoke would have spoken the language of their adopted families, their old words slipping away like tidewater. But if the settlers truly joined the Croatoan, why leave not one English name in their oral traditions? It feels less like drift, and more like deletion. Theories of deliberate forgetting. One hypothesis, whispered quietly among researchers, suggests that the settlers' English identity became a dangerous thing to keep. Rival tribes. If tensions between native groups deepened, it may have been safer for Roanoke survivors to erase every trace linking them to past conflicts. Spanish raids. If Spain hunted the colony, as some suspect, blending into obscurity may have been the only way to survive. Cultural taboo. Some oral histories hint at sickness following the settlers, whether literal disease or spiritual fear, and suggest their memory was gently folded away. Unspoken but not forgotten. In this telling, survival required surrender, not just of home, but of self. Symbols without meaning. In 2012, researchers digitally scanned John White's 16th-century map of the Carolina coast and uncovered something hidden, a small star-shaped mark. Drawn carefully, then covered beneath a patch of paper glued centuries earlier. The mark points inland, near where artifacts from Site X would later surface: pottery shards, burned timbers, and repurposed English tools. Some believe this symbol suggests White knew more than he revealed, hiding the location to protect Roanoke's survivors. Others wonder if he hid it because there was something there we weren't meant to find. Names carried by water. In several oral traditions from tribes near the Albemarle Sound, one recurring image appears: the river carried their names away. It's a poetic phrase, but unsettling when paired with archaeological evidence of shallow graves and washed-out camps near these waterways. Perhaps the settlers died along the rivers, their stories literally claimed by flood and storm. Or perhaps the carrying was intentional, a symbolic release, letting their English identities drift downstream into silence. The ghost of Virginia Dare. Of all the names lost to Roanoke, none lingers more than Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Later centuries would wrap her in legends. Some tales say she grew into a woman of striking beauty, only to be transformed into a white doe by native magic, a spirit forever roaming the forests around Roanoke. Others whisper she became a bridge between peoples, carrying the bloodlines of both colonist and native, disappearing into anonymity by design. Neither version offers certainty, but both carry the same quiet truth. Virginia's story became a myth because her name did not survive in life. A colony unnamed. Perhaps this is the final answer Roanoke offers us. Not one of death or assimilation, but of deliberate erasure. The settlers may have lived on, thrived even, but they left their names behind like footprints washed away by tidewater. And without names, history falters, because memory isn't only what we keep, it's what we choose to speak aloud. And somewhere along Roanoke's tangled paths, the speaking stopped. Walk the quiet marshlands now, where reeds sway softly against brackish water. And it feels as though something is missing, not just people, but their words. A silence deeper than absence. A forgetting chosen, or imposed. The colony may not be lost at all. Perhaps it was hidden. Perhaps it hid itself. Beneath the surface, the sea keeps its secrets. The coastline around Roanoke Island has never been still. The outer banks shift constantly under the push and pull of wind, tide, and storm. What was land 4 centuries ago now lies swallowed beneath dark, brackish waters. If Roanoke's final traces exist anywhere, they may rest below the waves, where the sand covers memories and the currents scatter them softly into silence. The drowning shore. Maps drawn in 1587 show a coastline wider than the one we see today. Centuries of hurricanes, storm surges, and rising seas have eaten away at the edges of Roanoke. Entire stretches of the island that once held paths, homes, and even farmland now lie beneath the shallow green waters of Pamlico Sound. Historians still wonder how much of the colony's story rests below us. Simply inaccessible. Every hurricane rewrites the shoreline. Every flood pushes artifacts further out to sea. Each season hides more than it reveals. Ghost structures below. In 2019, marine archaeologists conducted a sonar survey of the channels surrounding Roanoke. At first, the returns showed nothing but soft undulating sand and the shadows of eelgrass beds. Then, in one sector near the island's southern edge, something strange emerged: rectangular impressions, perfectly aligned, resting just beneath layers of sediment. The shapes resemble the outlines of small structures, foundations, perhaps, or storage pits. Divers sent to investigate reported fragments. Wooden stakes, their tips sharpened and blackened by fire, preserved under centuries of silt. A handful of ceramic shards with glazing styles matching 16th-century English pottery. And, half buried in the sediment, a rusted hinge, heavy with barnacles but unmistakably Elizabethan in design. Yet the findings remain inconclusive. Were these truly remnants of Roanoke? Or are we chasing another false promise beneath the waves? The vanishing island. Roanoke's disappearance may not just be a mystery of people, it may be a mystery of place. Geologists estimate that since the late 16th century, as much as 1.000 feet of shoreline has eroded into Pamlico Sound. Entire camps, gardens, and burial grounds may now lie beneath shifting underwater dunes. Storms act like thieves and archivists all at once, stealing artifacts from the land while depositing them somewhere new, hidden under unpredictable layers of sand. It's possible we've been searching in the wrong place all along, hunting for traces on land when the real story sleeps beneath water. Legends of lights beneath. Among local fishers, a quiet story persists, passed down like a lullaby. On calm nights, when the water is glass and the moonlight spills soft silver across the sound, strange lights appear beneath the surface, faint, flickering, as though from fires burning deep underwater. Some claim they're phosphorescent plankton, disturbed by invisible tides. Others suggest reflections from distant lighthouses. But there are those who believe the lights mark where Roanoke sleeps now, its final remnants resting beneath silt and seawater, still carrying the last warmth of lives lost centuries ago. Submerged secrets. In 2021, researchers conducted a second sonar survey near a submerged sandbar called 9-Foot Shoals. The scans revealed faint anomalies beneath the seabed, hard surfaces where there should have been nothing but soft sediment. Marine cores taken nearby brought up charcoal flecks trapped in ancient layers, hinting at old fires burned along vanished shores. If Roanoke's people dismantled their homes before leaving, as evidence suggests, some of those timbers may have been claimed by rising waters long before White's return. And if graves were dug near the shoreline, they, too, may now rest beneath soundless tides. Time's gentle erasure. Every year, the ocean claims a little more of Roanoke. The same storms that once hid answers continue to carry them further away, dispersing bone, wood, and pottery into deep channels where no light reaches. It's possible the colony hasn't vanished at all. It's simply moved, piece by piece, beneath a surface we rarely see. But recovery may be impossible now. The sands shift too often. Tides erase too quickly. Even when fragments surface, they come without context, unmoored from the stories they once belonged to. The quiet beneath the waves. Stand on Roanoke's southern shore at dusk and listen. You'll hear the soft hiss of tidewater folding into itself, the distant cry of gulls, and the faint hum of cicadas carried from inland marshes. Out beyond the shoals, the sound lies smooth as glass. Beneath it, shadows rest, timbers, bones, fragments of pottery, and perhaps even words scratched into surfaces that no eye has seen in 4 centuries. The past may not be gone at all. It may be sleeping, folded gently beneath the water. And maybe it wants to stay that way. Sometimes, we think of Roanoke as lost. But maybe it isn't lost. Maybe it's simply somewhere we cannot reach. Theories drift softly, like fog over the marshes, circling Roanoke's silence without ever breaking it. For more than 4 centuries, historians, archaeologists, and storytellers have bent close to the fragments, bones, pottery, carvings, whispers, trying to coax a single truth from them. But the pieces refuse to fit neatly together. Every answer births another question. Every discovery adds weight without closure. And so, Roanoke endures, not as history, but as haunting threads that fray. Some researchers believe Roanoke's story is simple. The settlers assimilated into the Croatoan tribe, leaving their English lives behind. Others argue the opposite, that the settlers met violence on every side, claimed by war, starvation, or betrayal. Some insist the colony fractured, splintering into many smaller groups who followed different rivers and vanished into separate histories. And then there are those who whisper of something stranger, that Roanoke wasn't lost at all, but hidden, its people choosing erasure, folding themselves into silence so complete it outlasted empires. Historians still wonder if Roanoke is unknowable because the past was lost, or because someone wanted it lost. Arguments in the ashes. Even among archaeologists, disagreements ripple softly beneath the surface. The pottery fragments at Site X suggest some settlers went inland, but skeptics argue they could have arrived there through trade, passed hand to hand long after Roanoke's fall. The English tools repurposed into native arrowheads may mean assimilation, or scavenging from an abandoned settlement. The Dare stone carries Eleanor's possible voice. But scholars still divide sharply, proof for some, hoax for others. Every artifact answers less than it promises. Maps and missing marks. John White's map of Roanoke, drawn in careful detail, adds another quiet riddle. Beneath a small paper patch glued centuries ago lies a star-shaped symbol, revealed only by modern scanning. Some interpret it as a clue, a hidden fort inland, where the settlers may have fled. Others suspect secrecy, white marking a site he knew the colony had moved to, concealing it intentionally from rival powers or opportunistic adventurers. If so, he took that knowledge with him to his grave. Legends that refuse to die. Folklore has grown where facts thin out, softening the mystery into myth. Some tales claim Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World, transformed into a white doe, forever roaming the forests of Roanoke. Others speak of ghost lights bobbing through the marshes at night, faint blue glows said to be the souls of settlers wandering between worlds. A few Croatoan oral traditions hint at a sickness brought by the Pale Ones, suggesting that memory itself was made taboo, folded away for protection. None of these stories can be proven. And yet, none have faded. Science meets silence. Modern techniques, DNA sampling, isotopic analysis, ground-penetrating radar, have brought us closer to Roanoke than ever before. And still, each step deepens the shadows. Genetic markers hint at possible English ancestry among descendants of local tribes, but nothing conclusive. Sonar surveys beneath the Pamlico Sound reveal possible submerged structures, but sediment hides certainty. Charcoal and pottery uncovered inland match Roanoke's timeline exactly, yet they speak nothing of names, faces, or fates. It's as though the story remains deliberately scattered, broken into pieces small enough to recognize but never assemble. The mystery as mirror. Perhaps Roanoke endures because we need it to. It reflects our longing for connection across time, our hope that we can still reach back and touch voices 4 centuries gone. It tempts us with fragments just sharp enough to wound, but never whole enough to heal. Each new discovery feels like leaning close to a whisper you can almost, but not quite, hear. And maybe that's the point. If you walk the island today, the trees lean low in the wind, their roots reaching into soil layered with centuries of absence. The marsh reeds tremble softly, and the air carries the salt tang of tides folding secrets beneath the surface. Somewhere below your feet, beneath sand and silt and shifting water, the answers may rest untouched. Or perhaps they were carried away long ago, like names on a current, dissolving into new lives and forgotten words. Every theory holds weight. Every theory slips through our hands. Roanoke refuses to resolve, and maybe that's why it still calls to us. The shoreline is quiet now. Here, where Roanoke's palisades once stood, the sea whispers softly against the sand. Pines lean gently in the breeze, their shadows stretching across brackish water. The marsh reeds sway like a tide of green breath, rustling secrets no one can quite hear. It has been more than 4 centuries. And yet, standing here, the weight of what's missing feels close, closer than time should allow. Somewhere beneath this shifting ground, families once walked barefoot between their small wooden homes. Children laughed at the edge of tide pools, and smoke curled upward from cooking fires. Now, only fragments remain. A shard of pottery, worn smooth by salt and time. A rusted hinge, buried beneath soft layers of sand. A single carved word, Croatoan, waiting beneath a tree that has long since fallen. That word is all we are given. And yet, somehow, it feels like too much and not enough all at once. Did they survive? Did they scatter inland, following quiet rivers into the forests, weaving their lives into new communities where their names were softly folded away? Did they leave across the sea, chasing safer shores we've never thought to search? Or did they vanish right here, carried into the Sound by storms, famine, or forces we've yet to imagine? Historians still argue, archaeologists still dig, and storytellers like us still listen to Roanoke's silence, hoping it will speak. But sometimes, it feels as though the silence is the answer. Standing on Roanoke's southern edge at twilight, the horizon fades into gray, and the water smooths to glass. For a moment, the whole Sound seems to hold its breath. If you stay long enough, you might think you hear something carried on the wind, faint, like distant voices, laughter threading through the hiss of reeds. Or maybe it's just the tide. Maybe it's always been just the tide. Roanoke's mystery lingers not because we've failed to solve it, but because some stories aren't meant to end. And perhaps, this is one of them. And now, the story rests. The tide pulls softly at the edge of Roanoke Island. just as it has for centuries. Each wave smooths the sand, carrying away footprints that were never ours to keep. Above the marsh, the pines lean and sway, their needles whispering against one another like old secrets exchanged between friends. The colony is gone, the answers are scattered, but here, in this moment, we let go of the need to know. Just breathe. The night stretches wide and quiet, draped in soft shadow. The salt air hangs gently around you, warm and cool all at once. And the sound of the water folds into itself, over and over, like pages closing slowly on a story that doesn't need an ending. You can almost imagine them still here, walking beneath lantern glow. Laughter rising softly from wooden paths. A lullaby carried on the wind from one small shelter to another. If you listen closely, maybe you hear it, or maybe it's only the hush of the sea. Always moving, always remembering. It's safe to let the questions drift away now. The way names dissolve into tidewater and time. Safe to surrender to the quiet. To feel the rhythm of breath and wave blurring together until there is no edge between now and then. Between what is known and what is lost. Close your eyes. Let the silence of Roanoke surround you like a soft blanket. The reeds sway, the air stills, and the ocean folds the past into itself, carrying it somewhere beyond reach. The mystery can sleep tonight. And so can you. The story rests now. And so do you.